Hello, everyone. I'm Emily Parker, and this is the story of how my own father told me I was worth less than a dog, and how I eventually became the only person who could save him from ruin. Where are you watching this from today? Wherever it is, I hope you'll hit that like button, subscribe, and settle in, because this story begins on a snowy Christmas night. The air in our house was thick with the scent of pine needles and roasting turkey, a smell that was supposed to mean warmth and family. But for me, it only ever smelled like an obligation. The forced smiles of my aunts and uncles were plastered on, their eyes darting around the perfectly decorated living room, a stage set for my father's annual performance as the proud patriarch. And at the center of his universe, as always, was my older brother, Brian. Brian was the golden boy, the heir apparent to my father's small but locally respected construction business. He had just graduated with a business degree from a state college, a C-plus average. But you'd have thought he'd cured cancer from the way my father, Thomas Parker, spoke of him. I, on the other hand, was the afterthought. The quiet, artistic daughter who was a constant, low-grade disappointment. My passions for painting and sculpture were dismissed as childish hobbies. My straight-A report cards in literature and art history were met with a grunt and "What kind of living can you make with that?" That Christmas, the dynamic was sharper than ever. Brian had recently bought a ridiculously pampered French bulldog named Duke, a creature that snorted and wheezed and was treated with more reverence than a visiting dignitary. "Look at the posture on him. Emily," my father had boomed earlier, as Duke sat on a velvet cushion by the fire. "That's a champion's posture. Cost Brian a pretty penny. But you get what you pay for. Quality. It's all about quality." I had just received a small local award for a charcoal sketch I'd done, a piece that had taken me 40 hours to complete. When I tried to mention it, my father waved his hand dismissively. "That's nice, dear. Now, Brian, tell Uncle Robert about your investment portfolio." Dinner was the main event. The long mahogany table gleamed under the chandelier, laden with food. The conversation, steered by my father, was a monologue celebrating Brian's genius. His new car, his smart investments, his killer instincts in the business world. I sat silently, pushing glazed carrots around my plate, feeling smaller and smaller with each passing moment. My mother, a gentle soul worn down by years of my father's abrasive personality, would occasionally shoot me a sympathetic glance, but she never dared to intervene. To challenge Thomas Parker was to invite a storm. The moment it all shattered came during dessert. My Aunt Carol, bless her heart, made a clumsy attempt to include me. "Emily, your mother tells me you're thinking about applying to that art institute in New York. How exciting." A hush fell over the table. All eyes turned to me, and I felt a hot blush creep up my neck. Before I could even form a response, my father let out a short, derisive laugh. It was a sound I knew well, a sound that could curdle milk. He took a slow sip of his expensive scotch, swirled the ice in his glass, and looked down the table at me. His eyes were cold, flat, and utterly devoid of warmth. "New York?" he scoffed. "She'd be eaten alive. She doesn't have the grit. She doesn't have the fight." He then turned his gaze to Brian, who was smugly stroking Duke, who was now sitting in his lap, snorting contentedly. A wide, cruel smile spread across my father's face. "You want to know the truth?" he announced to the entire table, his voice booming with authority. "I look at my son, Brian, and I see a winner. I see a future. I even look at his dog." He gestured with his glass towards the wheezing bulldog. "And I see a creature with better instincts, a better pedigree." He paused for dramatic effect, letting his words hang in the air like poison. Then he looked directly at me, And with a voice that cut through me like a shard of ice, he delivered the final blow. Honestly, Emily is not even as good as Brian's dog. The world went silent. The clinking of forks, the gentle Christmas music, the crackling fire. It all faded into a dull roar in my ears. I saw the shocked faces of my relatives, the flicker of pity in my mother's eyes, the triumphant smirk on Brian's face. But all I could really see was my father's cold, dismissive expression. He hadn't just insulted me. He had, in front of everyone who was supposed to be my family, declared me worthless, less than an animal. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and shameful. I couldn't breathe. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the polished floor. I didn't say a word. I didn't scream or cry out. A strange, terrifying calm washed over me. It was the calm of something breaking so completely that there was nothing left to salvage. I stood up, turned my back on the stunned table, and walked out of the dining room. I grabbed my thin coat from the hook by the door, pulled on my boots, and walked out into the freezing Christmas night. The snow was falling in thick, silent flakes, blanketing the world in white. And as I walked away from that house, with the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears, I made a vow I would never, ever come back. The bus ride to New York City was a 12-hour blur of dirty windows, the drone of the engine, and the hollow ache in my chest. I had less than $300 in my pocket, stuffed into a worn leather wallet that was a gift from my mother years ago, one of the few things I'd grabbed. Every time the bus lurched, the smooth leather felt like a small, sad reminder of the life I'd just amputated. The city that had been a distant, hopeful dream was now my only refuge, a concrete wilderness where I was completely and utterly alone. I arrived at Port Authority at dawn, a terrified 19-year-old girl with a single duffel bag and a heart full of ash. The first few months were brutal. I found a shoebox-sized apartment in a crumbling building in the farthest reaches of Queens, a place where the heat was temperamental, and the walls were so thin I could hear my neighbors' nightly arguments. I got a job as a dishwasher in a greasy spoon diner, my hands perpetually raw and smelling of bleach and old coffee grounds. Then I took a second job, stocking shelves at a 24-hour bodega. I worked 16 hours a day, fueled by cheap coffee and sheer desperation. I was a ghost, haunting the city, invisible to the millions of people rushing past me. The hunger was constant, not just for food, but for a sign that I hadn't made a catastrophic mistake. Some nights, I'd lie on my lumpy mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and my father's words would echo in the dark. Not even as good as Brian's dog. The humiliation would wash over me again, but now it was followed by a cold, hard resolve. I would not break. My art was my only escape. I couldn't afford canvases or proper paint. So I started small. I sketched on napkins during my 15-minute breaks, using a cheap pen to capture the faces I saw on the subway. I bought a small set of watercolors with a week's worth of grocery money and painted miniature cityscapes on scraps of cardboard. These small acts of creation were the only things that reminded me of who I was beyond a dishwasher, a stock girl, a disappointment. They were a lifeline. The turning point came on a cold, miserable night in November, almost a year after I'd left. I had just been fired from the diner because I'd dropped a whole tray of plates, a result of pure exhaustion. Walking home in the freezing rain, feeling the icy tendrils of despair wrap around me, I passed a huge, blank brick wall on the side of a derelict warehouse. It was an ugly, oppressive sight, a monument to urban decay. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. It wasn't despair anymore. It was rage, a white-hot, furious energy. I turned around, marched to the nearest hardware store, and spent the last $40 I had on 6 cans of spray paint. I had never worked with spray cans before, but that night, it didn't matter. Under the flickering orange glow of a single street lamp, that brick wall became my canvas. I poured all my pain, my anger, my loneliness, and my defiant hope onto it. I didn't paint a picture. I unleashed a storm. Swirls of deep indigo and black represented my past, pierced by jagged slashes of electric blue and furious crimson. At the center, a single, defiant white flower, a stylized magnolia, bloomed out of the chaos. It was raw, messy, and deeply personal. It was the truest thing I had ever created. I worked until dawn, my fingers numb, my body aching, but my spirit blazing. When I was done, I stumbled back to my apartment and collapsed, expecting to be arrested or at least fined by morning. Instead, something else happened. A local blogger, someone who documented street art, saw it and posted a photo. He called it the concrete bloom. The post went viral within the small, intense world of the New York art scene. People started making pilgrimages to see it. It was talked about, analyzed, and admired. A week later, I was cleaning graffiti off the bodega's windows when a sleek black car pulled up. An older woman with sharp eyes, a severe silver bob, and an impeccably tailored suit stepped out. "Are you the artist?" she asked, her voice raspy but firm. I was terrified, thinking she was the building owner. I started to stammer an apology, but she cut me off. "Don't apologize for genius. Child, my name is Eleanor Vance. I own 3 galleries in Soho. I've been looking for you." That was the beginning. Eleanor became my patron, my mentor, and the closest thing to a mother I had in the city. She saw the talent beneath my rage. She gave me a studio space, bought me proper supplies, and pushed me relentlessly. My first commission was for a small coffee shop, then a boutique hotel, then a tech startup's new office. My style was unique, a fusion of raw, emotional graffiti, and fine art elegance. I started a small company, hiring other struggling street artists I met. We called it Viridian Vistas, a name that spoke of growth and new horizons. We weren't just painting walls, we were transforming spaces, giving concrete a soul. And with every project, with every check I cashed, I was building a new life, brick by painful brick, a world away from the man who thought a dog had more value than his own daughter. The next 5 years were a whirlwind. Viridian Vistas exploded. What started as a small crew of hungry artists transformed into a full-fledged creative agency. Our signature style became the hottest thing in urban design. We were hired to design the interiors of flagship stores on Fifth Avenue, to create massive, building-sized murals in the meatpacking district, and to consult on the aesthetic of luxury condo developments. We were featured in Forbes, Architectural Digest, and the New York Times. The girl who sketched on napkins was now the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, a recognized name in the art and business worlds. I traded my cramped Queens apartment for a penthouse in Chelsea, with a panoramic view of the city I had made my own. Success changed me. It had to. The art world, especially at the intersection of commerce, was not for the timid. It was a shark tank, and I had to learn to be a shark myself. I learned to negotiate with ruthless developers, to stare down corporate boards, and to protect my brand with the ferocity of a mother bear. The soft, wounded girl who had fled into the snow was still in there somewhere, but she was now encased in a shell of tailored power suits, decisive actions, and an unshakable confidence I had forged in the fires of the city. I was no longer just an artist, I was an empire builder. That empire, however, attracted predators. The biggest threat came in the form of Marcus Thorne, a slick, venture capitalist known for acquiring and gutting creative companies, selling them off for parts. He was everything my father respected: ruthless, wealthy, and dripping with aggressive masculinity. He saw Viridian Vistas not as a cultural force, but as an undervalued asset with intellectual property he could exploit. He began his assault subtly, buying up shares through shell companies, poaching my key artists with inflated offers, and planting negative stories about our business practices in the financial press. For the first time since my early days in New York, I felt a genuine sense of fear. Marcus Thorne was a different kind of monster than my father. My father's cruelty was born of ignorance and ego. Thorne's was a cold, calculated strategy. He came to my office once, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. He sat in the chair opposite my desk, the same chair where I now interviewed and hired people, and laid out his plan to dismantle everything I had built. "It's nothing personal, Emily," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "It's just good business. You've had a nice little run, but you're an artist playing a CEO. I'm a CEO who collects art. See the difference?" In that moment, looking at his predatory smile, I saw a reflection of my father and my brother. I saw the same smug certainty, the same dismissal of my worth. The old rage, the one that had fueled the concrete bloom, surged through me. But this time it wasn't wild and chaotic. It was focused. It was a weapon. I remembered a small chipped Christmas ornament I kept in my desk drawer, a little glass angel. It was the only thing I had from my childhood bedroom. I had grabbed it without thinking when I left. Sometimes I'd look at it to remind myself of the pain, but now, it was a reminder of my strength. I had survived that. I could survive this. I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. "The difference, Marcus, is that an artist sees the world not just for what it is, but for what it can be, and I see your plan, and it's not going to happen." I fought him with everything I had. I hired the best lawyers in the city. I worked 18-hour days, strategizing with my team, but I knew I couldn't beat him at his own game. He had deeper pockets and more connections. So I used mine. I used my art. I launched a citywide public art campaign called Corporate Canvases, where we partnered with small businesses that were being threatened by large corporations like Thorne's. We created stunning, free murals on their storefronts, telling their stories, turning them into symbols of community resistance. The campaign went viral. We got national press coverage. Thorne was suddenly cast as the villain, the corporate Goliath trying to crush the artistic David. His investors got nervous. His public image took a massive hit. The final move was a checkmate. I used my own capital to secretly buy the debt of one of his major real estate projects, one he was using as leverage. When he defaulted on a payment, I became his primary creditor. I called him to my office. The smugness was gone, replaced by a baffled fury. I didn't gloat. I simply laid out the terms. He would sell me back all of his shares in Viridian Vistas for a penny on the dollar, and he would publicly withdraw his takeover bid. In return, I wouldn't call in his debt and bankrupt him. He stared at me, his face pale. "You learned," he whispered, a hint of grudging respect in his voice. "I had to," I replied, my voice as cold and hard as the marble on his office buildings. "Now get out of my company." As he left, defeated, I stood by my window, looking out over the sprawling city. I had faced the beast and won. I was the queen of this concrete canvas, powerful and secure. I had built a fortress of success so high and so strong that I believed no ghost from my past could ever touch me again. I was wrong. Years passed. Viridian Vistas continued to grow, Expanding to London and Tokyo, my life settled into a rhythm of creative projects, business meetings, and quiet satisfaction. The pain of my past had receded, becoming a dull, distant scar rather than an open wound. I rarely thought of my family. I had heard through the grapevine of relatives, who now reached out with sycophantic friendliness, that my father's business was struggling, but I felt nothing. It was a story about strangers. The past came crashing back on a rainy Tuesday night. I was working late, reviewing designs for a new project, when my private line rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, from my old hometown area code. I almost ignored it, but some strange instinct made me answer. Hello? There was a long silence, filled with static and what sounded like a choked sob. Then, a voice I hadn't heard in over a decade, a voice I thought I had forgotten, slurred through the phone. Emily? Is that you? It was my father. He sounded old, frail, and drunk. The booming, authoritative voice that had shattered my world was gone, replaced by a pathetic, wheezing whisper. My first instinct was to hang up, to slam the door on this ghost. But I was frozen, my hand gripping the phone. What do you want? I asked, my voice devoid of any emotion. He started rambling, his words a tangled mess of self-pity and excuses. The business was gone. They had lost everything. Brian, the golden boy, the one with the killer instincts, had made a series of disastrously risky investments in tech startups and cryptocurrency. He'd poured all the company's capital and my father's retirement savings into ventures that collapsed, one after another. He had tried to hide the losses, taking out predatory loans until the whole house of cards came tumbling down. The bank had foreclosed on their home. The business was being liquidated to pay off creditors. They had nothing. He was supposed to be the smart one. My father wept into the phone. He had a business degree. He promised me. He promised. I listened, my face a stone mask. I felt no pity. I felt no anger. I felt a vast cold emptiness. This was the man who had celebrated his son's supposed genius while crushing my spirit. And now, that genius had ruined him. It was a perfect, bitter irony. I don't know why you're telling me this, I said finally, my voice flat. This has nothing to do with me. Please, Emily, he begged, his voice cracking. We have nowhere to go. We're staying with your Aunt Carol. It's humiliating. We need help. You're successful now. We see you in the magazines. The sheer audacity of it almost made me laugh. He was asking for help from the daughter he had declared worthless. But then his drunken rambling took a darker turn, revealing the true depth of his betrayal. I shouldn't have listened to him, he slurred. I shouldn't have touched it. It was your mother's. She always wanted you to have it. My blood ran cold. Have what? What are you talking about? He let out a dry, rattling sob. Your mother, before she passed. She set up a trust for you. It wasn't much, but it was from her inheritance, her family's money. She told me to give it to you when you turned 25. She knew I was hard on you. She wanted you to have your own start. I sank into my chair, the sleek leather feeling cold against my skin. My mother had died of cancer 2 years after I left. I hadn't gone to the funeral. The wound was still too raw. I had never known about any trust. Brian found out about it, my father continued, his voice thick with guilt. He said it was just sitting there, wasted. He said you'd probably just spend it on paint. He convinced me to let him invest it. He promised he would triple it. He said we could give you even more back later, but he lost it all. Emily, every last cent of your mother's money. It was the seed money for his first failed company. The emptiness inside me ignited into a cold, diamond-hard rage. This was more than just an insult at a Christmas dinner. This was theft. They hadn't just emotionally abandoned me, they had stolen my mother's last gift to me, her one act of defiance against her husband's cruelty. They had taken her love and used it to fuel my brother's ego, then burned it to the ground. I thought of the chipped glass angel in my desk. My mother had given it to me. They had taken everything else. I see, I said, and my voice was so cold it could have frozen fire. Thank you for clarifying, Father. Will you help us? He asked, a pathetic thread of hope in his voice. For your mother's sake? A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. Oh, I would help him, but not in the way he thought. Be at my office on Friday, 10 sharp, I said. And bring Brian. Bring the whole family. I hung up before he could reply, the final piece of my plan clicking perfectly into place. Friday morning arrived, crisp and clear. The view from my corner office on the 50th floor was spectacular. The city spread out below me like a kingdom. I sat behind my massive obsidian desk, a piece of modern art in itself, and waited. I had asked my assistant to hold all my calls. I wanted no interruptions. At precisely 10 a.m., she buzzed to announce their arrival. My father, my mother's sister Carol, who had taken them in, and my brother, Brian. They were shown in, and the sight of them was jarring. They looked small and diminished under the high ceilings of my office, like faded photographs from a life I no longer lived. My father wore an old, ill-fitting suit, his face puffy and gray. Brian, the former golden boy, had lost his smug confidence. He looked defeated, his eyes darting around the room, unable to meet my gaze. Only my Aunt Carol looked at me with a sad, pleading expression. They stood awkwardly in the middle of the room until I gestured to the chairs opposite my desk. They sat down stiffly, a broken family coming to beg at the throne of the daughter they had cast out. Thank you for coming, Emily, my father began, his voice raspy. This is very generous of you. I held up a hand to silence him. I didn't want to hear his platitudes. I didn't want to hear his excuses. I let the silence stretch, enjoying the way they squirmed under my cool, steady gaze. Brian shifted in his seat, finally looking at me. Look, Em, he started, using a childhood nickname that made my skin crawl. I messed up. I know I did. We just need a little help to get back on our feet. A loan. Maybe. We'll pay you back. I swear. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. A loan, I repeated, the words tasting like ash. You want a loan? After you took my mother's legacy, the money she left specifically for me, and gambled it away on your pathetic pipe dreams? You didn't just mess up. Brian, you stole from me. And you, I said, my eyes locking onto my father's. You let him do it. You stood by and watched him steal the last piece of my mother I had left. Oh, my father flinched as if I had struck him. I thought he could make it grow, he whispered. You thought he was a winner. I finished for him, my voice dripping with ice. And you thought I was worthless. Less than his dog, if I recall correctly. The memory of that Christmas night hung in the air between us, as vivid and ugly as if it had happened yesterday. My father finally broke, his face crumbling. I'm sorry, Emily, he choked out. I was a fool. I was a proud, stupid old fool. Please, help us. I said nothing for a long moment. I reached into a drawer and pulled out a single folder. I slid it across the polished surface of the desk. It stopped directly in front of my father. I am not in the business of charity, I said, my voice calm and measured. But I do believe in work. I believe in earning your keep. I believe in starting from the bottom and pulling yourself up, because that is exactly what I had to do. He opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside was a single document, an employment contract. His eyes scanned the page, his face growing paler with every word. I had seen the look of defeat on Marcus Thorne's face, but this was different. This was the look of a man seeing his entire world, his entire sense of self, being utterly demolished. This is a contract for a janitorial position, he stammered, his voice barely audible. Night shift. Minimum wage. That's right, I said, my voice clear and ringing in the silent office. You will work for a subsidiary that services this building. You will clean the floors. You will empty the trash. You will be just as invisible as you made me feel. You will learn the value of $1 that you haven't inherited or stolen. That is my offer. That is the only help you will ever get from me. Aunt Carol gasped. Brian shot to his feet, his face red with fury. You can't be serious. This is our father. I rose from my chair, a towering figure of power they could no longer recognize. I walked around the desk and stood before them, looking down at the broken man who had created me and then tried to destroy me. He was still staring at the contract, a single tear tracing a path through the wrinkles on his cheek. I leaned in close, my voice a soft, venomous whisper for the whole family to hear. He told me I wasn't as good as your dog, Brian. But you see, Dad, I said, looking into his watery, defeated eyes. This time, the dog can't save you. The silence that followed was absolute. There was nothing left to say. I turned my back on them and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, presenting them with a view of my back and my city. I didn't need to see their expressions or hear their stuttered protests. The meeting was over. The verdict had been delivered. I heard the shuffling of feet, the door opening, and then closing with a soft, final click. They were gone. I remained at the window for a long time, watching the endless river of traffic below, the tiny, anonymous people rushing towards their own destinies. I didn't feel a rush of triumphant joy or a surge of vengeful satisfaction. I felt quiet, a profound, hollowed-out peace. The rage that had fueled me for so long had finally burned itself out, leaving behind not emptiness, but clarity. It was never about punishing them. It was about freeing myself. It was about proving, to myself and to the world, the value that my own father could never see. My justice was not in his humiliation, but in my own success. My victory was not in his downfall, but in my rise. He could choose to take the job or not. It didn't matter to me. His fate was now his own, as mine had always been. My worth was never tied to his opinion. It was a truth I had to discover on my own, forged in hardship and painted in defiant color across the concrete canvas of my life. The greatest revenge, I realized, is not to destroy your enemies, but to build a life so magnificent that they no longer have any place in it. What does true justice look like to you? Have you ever had to make a hard decision to protect your own peace? Share your story in the comments below. I'd truly love to hear it.